We are live on everything but Facebook here. There we go. Facebook is reconnected. My shoulder's not being my friend today. I went out to play tennis for the first time in 20 years yesterday, so my body's rebelling. All right, looks like everything is up and running. It is raining today, so you may be able to hear that rain behind me. Let's see. Okay. What are you asking me, TikTok? Okay. Oh, that's interesting. All right. I guess TikTok has a background filter, so I guess you guys can hear the rain. All right. So this morning we are answering questions on business differences between the West and here in Kenya. All right. So let's go ahead and get right on into it. I guess we'll also talk about the businesses that we've seen that have been really successful here, repeatable businesses, unique businesses, and not so much because they're not repeatable, but repeatable businesses that people can come in and start up that we've seen be successful time and time and time again, and typically in multiple ways, right? Typically, the different business owners are going to come in and do business in completely different ways. And that's really why you don't really have any competition in your business space but yourself. So you don't want to start playing someone else's game and trying to beat them at their thing. That is a 100% loser. Never seen anybody win doing that. But beyond that, multiple people can do the same business and have a completely different client set, right? So we have seen some things that seem to hit over and over and over again. And so I guess we'll get a little bit into that as well. And we'll take your questions while we are doing this live. So it's an informal Q&A. And so, yeah, I mean, it is Sunday, isn't it? Which is normally our Q&A day. So we'll take your questions on any and everything as they come in. And we'll just get into the business segment now. All right. Yes. Thank you. Welcome. Great to see you again. Thank you. All right. All right. You guys are filling up nicely. Okay. So, one of the number one things that we see as far as repeatable businesses is typically some sort of export of agribusiness, right? So some kind of grown agricultural product that ends up being exported out. Typically, you can do a deal with your country's Exim Bank on that, right? So U.S. Exim Bank, government-owned bank. There's a Canadian Exim Bank. I'm pretty sure it has a different name, though, if memory serves. There's a UK Exim Bank. So if you want information on your Exim Bank, just Google the name of your country and Exim Bank. Every country has at least one. Some countries have two. They're not always called Exim Bank, okay? Some countries will have like a private Exim Bank and a public Exim Bank, and they won't overlap. So in the United States, there's only the one. But some countries have it set up where if you're doing like small trader business, like you have a farm and you're importing watermelons or something like that, then you would deal with their private Exim Bank. And that if you were doing like government business, like contracting business or something that's government regulated, then you would deal with their government Exim Bank. So different countries have a different setup when it comes to Exim Bank. But every international trader country has an Exim Bank, right? Maybe North Korea doesn't, right? Cuba might not, Haiti might not, right? But every country that is actively trading internationally has an Exim Bank. The purpose of Exim Bank is typically to facilitate international trade. Right? So you end up qualifying for your own Exim Bank's help by leaving the country sometimes. So, so there's that. Right? But we've seen that utilized quite a few times on the United States side. On the U.S. side, it's a loan guarantee. So it's kind of like getting an SBA loan, where the government guarantees the loan, but there's still a private financial institute that actually issues the loan, and whatever guidelines, that those institutes are going to follow. So there are, however, multiple ways to qualify. And so that's helped a lot of folks that don't have money and don't have credit qualify for Exim Bank financing. And so the way they do that is through purchase order qualification. Okay, so a lot of folks have sourced whatever it is that they're going to export back to the United States or import into the United States. And what they'll do is they'll get purchase orders, which are not legally binding, so they're not hard to get. But they'll get purchase orders from companies. The company is essentially the only party that benefits from a purchase order, because a purchase order locks in a kind of pre-negotiated price with the company. You can't enforce a purchase order like you can't make the company buy from you. So the only beneficial party in that arrangement is typically the company. So it's not a difficult thing to get purchase orders. And then you would present those purchase orders, and then due diligence would be done to make sure everything was legitimate. And then financing could be issued on the basis of the purchase order, right? Not credit score or collateral assets, et cetera, et cetera. So we've seen plenty of folks that were able to finance their deals through Exim Bank with no money at all, right? So takes a little bit longer to do. So it's definitely more difficult to kind of start with nothing, because you're doing everything at that point. And that's how it's been for every single person who's done that. They're the ones making the calls. They're up, 16 hours a day, getting that business going, so on and so forth. All right. Hey, how's it going? All right. So definitely look into that. Definitely see what it takes. You may gain access to multiple Exim Banks. There's a Kenyan Exim Bank. So you may be able to do the export side over here with the Kenyan Exim Bank, and the import side with the US Exim Bank, so on and so forth. It has to have a positive impact on one of the things that the Exim Bank is focused on. So U.S. job creation is definitely one of those things. So the Exim Bank obviously prefers to have U.S. made products exported internationally, right? However, if an import of a product supports U.S. jobs, then that works too, right? So you got to go look at what the mission statement of the different Exim Banks are that you're thinking about engaging, and then make sure that whatever it is you're doing lines up with their mission statement, okay? That kind of pulls us right into the next kind of business, all right? Public-private partnerships. A lot of folks, and it's mistakenly, I believe, right? So let me take a step back and first talk about the mistake that a lot of people make. And a lot of folks make this mistake, especially in the Black community in the United States, when they're forming their first business. There's a ton of nonprofit businesses in the U.S. that have no business being nonprofit businesses. But the person who originates that business, because nonprofits have no owner, all right? No one owns a nonprofit, all right? That's part of what you give up for getting your charitable designation, 501c, whatever, 501c3, 501c4, 501c8, whatever, all right? So to not pay taxes, you lose equity. That's the give up to get the tax exemption, okay? So no one owns the nonprofit, which a lot of people find out the hard way when their board kicks them out of the nonprofit that they started. But anyway, typically most of those nonprofits were never supposed to be nonprofits. The originator got it in their head that what they're doing is so good, so charitable, so nice, that if they just made it a nonprofit and there was a tax write-off associated with, donating, that they would get all this money to come in because they're doing such a great selfless thing. Okay? That's not the way it works. Most of those people find out very quickly that nobody is giving them any money. Okay? And typically most of those organizations actually should have been public benefit corporations where they would have been able to raise money by selling equity, something that they don't have in a nonprofit. So the only way to raise money in a nonprofit other than those donations would be to sell debt, because there is no equity, which is a complicated process, but lucrative. All right. Now, neither here nor there. A lot of folks also think that when they go to another country, they can do this thing that will benefit the country. And if they're benefiting the country, then the government should support them. And so they start these public-private partnerships, really from a place of falsehood, right? And so it doesn't really work out. So that's number one. Make sure that what you're doing actually is a private public partnership, right? Something that should be a private public partnership. How do you figure that out? Well, the number one way to figure it out is figure out whatever the stated goals of the government are and make sure that whatever you're doing aligns with those goals, right? So for example, right now, affordable housing is a government priority. Are you developing affordable housing, right? Or are you developing luxury housing, right? If you're developing affordable housing, maybe you can do a private-public partnership, all right? My understanding is that they built, what was it? I want to say they built something like 2,000 affordable housing units so far, and the applicants for the affordable housing are 200,000. So is there an opportunity there? There just might be, right? But it aligns with the government's focus. Now, your alignment could also be with the county government. It doesn't necessarily have to be with the national government. Like this county government has a focus on women's health. And one of my kind of side projects is a maternity hospital to answer the issue of Black women dying during childbirth, right? So does it align with the government's stated goals that they want to focus on women's health, and I want to do a women's health hospital? It aligns. So maybe it's something that will qualify for private-public partnership, right? So what you want to do if you're going to partner doesn't matter the most. If you're doing solo business, what you want to do is fine. You go ahead and do that. Still, what the market wants is what matters most, but you'll find that out, right? But when it's a public-private partnership, what the public wants via their representation, i.e. what the government wants, matters the most, okay? So public-private partnerships, okay, are another phase that works out pretty well as long as the person engaging in that partnership understands that that private-public partnership has to align with the stated goals of whoever the public is, whether it's county government, federal government, whatever, right? So there's that. So a lot of folks that try to create a private-public partnership, they're actually looking to create an NGO or something. So don't have it in your head that if the government is working with you, that they're going to smooth all roads and everything's going to be easier, and the money's going to come faster. People who are getting into private-public partnerships because of that are setting themselves up for failure. That's typically not even the way it works, right? So, in fact, oftentimes you're in the crosshairs of even more bureaucracy, because whichever members of the public or members of the government are assisting you, they need to maintain a beyond reproach facade, whether that's who they really are or not. That's definitely the public image that they need to maintain. So there any little documentation or paperwork or whatever that they think you need to do, even if you wouldn't have had to do it if you were just going through it privately, you're going to have to do, just to make sure that from the perspective of their voters, that they're above board and that there's no corruption and there's no even perception of impropriety, right? So you may actually have to jump through additional hoops to make sure that there's not even, the perception of impropriety. So if you're thinking it's easier, if that's what's in your head, don't do it, right? Step away, go hire a professional, figure out the right way to do it, okay? But for those people who it actually is the right thing to do and it makes actual sense to go down that harder road, in my opinion, then make sure that you're aligned with the stated goals. Make sure that you are sending an employee or attending any budgeting meetings, all right, so that you know where the money is going, because that will stall out your partnership if you're partnering in an area where the infrastructure money is not being sent. Okay, it's essentially legal insider trading. You can do it anywhere. You can do it in the United States. You can go to the city council meeting and see where the city council meeting is sending the money, right? If it was stocks and bonds and you made a decision to buy a stock after finding out what was going on with the money inside the company, that would be insider trading. It would be illegal. But when it's government procurement and you're looking at where tax money is going, that's 100% legal. It's the most boring meeting you'll ever sit in your life. But you can sit in those meetings and you can listen to whichever council, whether it's city council, whether it's procurement council, or whoever it is. You can listen to them all talk about how many tax dollars are going to go into the infrastructure in this county, how many tax dollars are going to go into the infrastructure in that county, and it's horrific. It's horrifically boring. However, it's legal. You can then decide, okay, cool, I'm going to build houses over there because the government just pledged that they're going to put $20 billion in infrastructure over there, right? They're going to put in, a water filtration plant over there. That's where I'm buying land to build, my affordable housing then, and so on and so forth. 100% legal. Boring as hell. Most people don't do it, and that's why they don't win, right? So just make sure that you're doing things to set yourself up for success. All right? That's why all of our houses, for example, we have houses that are right outside of Deanny Beach, right? Very, very, well-known tourist area. People will go outside of Deanny Beach so that they don't have to pay Deanny Beach prices, and because there's not a lot available in Deanny Beach. It's already a setup, area. It's already fully established. So they'll go out, they'll find places to buy, and then there won't be a road to the place. Like you'll be riding, like you're driving through the safari, getting to this place, right? We went out, built a whole bunch of houses. Actually, even the plots that are available in the special that we're running right now, where people's houses are going to get built as a result, are in the same area in Deanny Beach. So we went out, built a whole bunch of houses, right? So within 6 months of building the houses, they came in and paved the road, right? So it's a paved road to all of the houses that we built, right? People were like, oh, he must have bribed the government to pave the roads, and all the rumors start, right? We sat in the boring ass county meeting, and in that meeting they were like, we're going to pave this road in the next 12 months. The money has been allocated, the blah 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 blah. We're gonna put electricity in this area in the next 6 months. We're gonna do clean water in this area in the next 6 months. Right? That was it. We sat in a boring ass 6-hour meeting and listened to all the accounting details of where all the tax money was going. We went there, we built the houses, the road came in 6 months. And everybody's like, oh, he knows the president. He made a phone call and got the roads paved outside of his construction site, because we were literally the only people sitting in that meeting. There's a bunch of lawyers and us. Right? So if you go find out where their money is going and make sure that that aligns with your public-private partnership, you're going to succeed. If you don't, it's speculation. It's essentially a lack of due diligence. right? I'm sure every lawyer that was in that room was doing due diligence. They were doing their legal due diligence on an acquisition. In that same area where we built those houses for you guys, they're building a golf course. I guarantee one of the 6 or 7 lawyers that was in that room listening to that meeting with us was the lawyers for the golf course doing their due diligence, right? So that's how that works. All the boring bullshit that you don't see on Shark Tank, that's not in Margin Call and all the business movies, that's what allows you to win, okay? Especially in these public-private partnerships. All right, so that is how the public-private partnership side of things initiates, at least. All right. Moving on is private enterprise. Okay. Private enterprise is anything that you're doing by yourself as an organization. That does not mean that you don't have a team. Okay. A lot of folks in their home country can kind of get away with not having a team because they do have a team. They have a local team of people that just don't necessarily work for them. And they're very, very aware, typically, of the laws that affect the thing that they're doing. Okay. Here, folks who relocate here or expand their business here may not be as aware of the laws that affect whatever it is that they're doing. So you need a formal team here, not an informal team like you might have in your, place of origin, right? Trying to think. My first business, I had an informal team for a very long time, right? So like I used to do my taxes at wherever it was, doesn't even exist anymore. It wasn't H&R Block, but it was something like it, right? So I had an informal tax guy when I'm doing my taxes. Hey, what about this? What about that? Right? All part of the team. I could have sat there and said, oh, I built this business all by myself. That's not true. I asked so many people questions, had mentors. I had an informal team. They just weren't employees or vendors or whatever, right? But that's because like I knew certain laws. I knew how certain things worked because it was my local area. I had grown up there, and over time you hear somebody say, oh, this is illegal, that's illegal, this is legal, that's not legal. And so you get a framework of like, okay, this is how things are done in my home area. That does not extend internationally, right? So when you expand internationally and it's going to be a private enterprise, you need a team. All right. If you can't afford a team, wait. Okay. Locally, if you can't afford a team, just do it, because you still know the law for the largest extent of what you're doing. You're not going to fall into a pitfall for the most part. You shouldn't anyway. But when you're going international, you do not know, and you could fall into a pit, right? And so you have to have a minimal team. That minimal team has to be a tax expert, a law expert, and maybe an industry expert, depending on what it is you're doing. Okay? So super important. Stop the nonsense. YouTube is not going to teach you how to run your business. Neither is ChatGPT. Get a team. All right? Within the framework of that country anyway. Get a team. Every country that you expand into, you need to get an expansion team. All right? A team of local professionals in that country that can facilitate the initial stages of that expansion. Okay? What kind of pitfalls can you run into? There can be rules that don't even make sense to you. I'll give you a great example. When you're doing a real estate conveyance, which means you're buying land, right? You're buying land for your company, you're buying land for your house, you're buying land for whatever. Most of our clients, the countries they come from, when they read over the contract to buy the real estate, and maybe they show it to a lawyer, and the lawyer reads over it, like, okay, yeah, this is fine. This is exactly what you said you wanted. And they sign the contract, and the seller signs the contract. Now, the contract is in effect. It's in force, right? Wrong. Here, real estate conveyance contracts are not enforced by signatures. The contract is actually enforced by the deposit. That's not normal for the countries most of our clients come from, right? So you can sign a contract, But if the deposit is less than 10%, the contract's null and void. So you can literally sign a contract and think you're covered and think everything is fine, and you've done your due diligence and the blah 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 blah, but you don't realize that under that system, what makes the contract binding is enough consideration. So if it's not a 10%, and like the con men understand that you can pay 5% in the United States. You can pay 3.5% with an FHA. So they know, and they get this terminology. Oh, it's the same down payment as an FHA. Oh, I bought my first house on an FHA. Oh, okay, 3.5%. You just voided your contract. Right? So now they can just take your money and walk away, and there's nothing you can do about it because there's no actual contract in effect. Now, how would you know that? Right? So that's why you need a team, and not having a team is absurdly stupid. Right? So if you're going to expand and do business internationally, you need an expansion team. You don't have to keep them forever. Eventually you'll learn the rules. Right? But until you do learn the rules, you're just a walking target, and someone's going to take a shot at you. So, private enterprise, private expansion, you need an expansion team, period. Outside of that, you're just scamming yourself. All right. Next is nonprofit enterprise, right? We have a lot of nonprofit enterprise in most of the countries that we work with. Might be called not-for-profit, depending on where you're from. Here, it would be called an NGO. NGO is a weird acronym because essentially everything is an NGO that's not owned by the government. However, it's really utilized for these kind of nonprofit-esque businesses, right? The difference is that internationally, there's typically an NGO board, and the NGO board can decide that there's NGO status not just for a company, but for a project. So you could have a completely for-profit company and then do an NGO project and have that project certified by the NGO board, right? That's something that's a little bit different. Like, we can't necessarily do that in the United States. A charity is a charity, and a for-profit business is a for-profit business, and there's not a whole lot of, overlap there. But what ends up happening is internationally, you can take almost like a project proposal and say, hey, listen, we're going to go build, we're going to go build a low-income property high-rise, right? We're going to build 100 units of low-income, condos. And that particular project, we're going to do a joint venture with the, maybe the general contractor, and then we're submitting the business proposal to the NGO board for NGO status on this particular project, right? So you can do that, which is great because it actually allows for an avenue for regular businesses to then turn around and do charitable work without creating a charity, right? So they can just create a joint venture, which the two or more companies involved in the joint venture would then create, a third company, and then they would go ahead and execute whatever charitable thing they wanted to do, and that thing could be NGO status, and the rest of the companies not be NGO status. So that's the closest thing to, in America, what we would call a public benefit corporation, like Ben and Jerry's ice cream, public benefit corporation, right? So if you're going to do that, you need to figure out whether or not you're full-time nonprofit, the way that it's done in the U.S. and in Canada, and I believe in the U.K., or are you going to run a business and 2-3 times a year enter into essentially a nonprofit venture, right? And then you figure out, how you want to do that. Okay. The 501c3 thing, it's not the same out here. So there's not going to be one category like a 501c3 tax category. You would simply apply for tax exemption on a charitable basis. And again, your team would have to be the ones that would get that done. Okay, because if you applied for the wrong charitable basis, you're going to be denied the tax exemption, or you're going to have to show like 2 years of charitable works to get the tax exemption if you choose the wrong one, or the wrong legal precedent for the request. Okay, so again, tax expert, law expert, possibly industry expert, if that's not you. And even if that is you, it may change in the markets, right? Like if you're an electrician, they do 120 volts in the United States. Here they do 240 or 230, right? So the way that they wire things is different. You may need a local industry expert to fill the gaps for you, right? You still have enough information to catch up very quickly because you're still an electrician, right? But the things they do differently out here, you're gonna have learning curves. It's gonna be a crash course in getting caught up to speed. So you might need that third expert on your team. All right, you may not. It all depends on what the business is. Okay. All right. Next one, remote business / consulting. If you have a U.S. business that can provide services inside or outside. Now, the permit legalities change depending on whether it's inside or outside. But inside or outside of Kenya, if you're trying to provide those services inside of Kenya, then you're going to need an investor permit. If you're just providing those services outside of Kenya, then you wouldn't need any kind of work permit. You could get a digital nomad permit. It's brand new. So you could do that. But you could also be on a Class K and, just be relaxing here and making sure that all the work is being done out there. So you can do that. All right. So there's not a whole lot to say about that. You would just continue doing business the way you do business, and that would be the end of that. You could have a subsidiary situation where you have a parent company outside of the country and you have an affiliate or a subsidiary inside of the country, right? And then you would need an investor permit, maybe. If you were going to run it. If you hired a local to run it, you actually wouldn't need an investor permit. So different ways to do that. And then your team would have to absolutely be in place. You could also do public business, right? So you could do business that's on its way to the stock market, right? Like your part of your business plan or part of your exit, really, it would be an exit, is to go public and to join. In this case, it would be the Nairobi Stock Exchange, right? So you would initiate that company as a public company, and then work towards your IPO. All right, you need a team. Starting to see the pattern here. You need a team. Some things even require you to do like a proof of concept, 2 years in operation, minimum, right? So you would have to actually come in, operate, not necessarily be profitable per se, right? Because it might some companies it takes some 3 to 5 years to become profitable. So not necessarily be profitable, but definitely operate. And then you can kind of do that conversion. That's a requirement. There's a 2-year requirement for like REITs, for example, right? So definitely need a team to get that done. So most of your business stuff, if you want to be serious about it, you're going to need a team and you're going to need an investor permit. If you don't have an investor permit, you're operating illegally, and they will catch you eventually. Sometimes they wait. They can wait for 12 years. They can wait, let you hit your first million before they freeze your business accounts and confiscate your funds and deport you for illegally working in the country. Same as the United States. Same as virtually any other country that's serious about immigration. So you want to do it the right way. Make sure you have all your permits together, and make sure that you're operating legally, and then you don't have anything to worry about. But any of the business that you're looking to do in country is going to typically require a investor permit if you're not eligible for citizenship, right? If you are eligible for citizenship, you need to initiate on that. We had a client, so horrible. We had a client that, and not even a client, a prospect. They never really onboarded. That was looking to onboard, and then in that onboard process, we found out that her father was Kenyan, and we're like, all right, you need to get your Kenyan citizenship. Our lawyers can definitely make sure you get it. You need to onboard completely differently. It's actually cheaper, right? And all your restrictions are going to be removed. You're going to be a Kenyan citizen. We need to do that. She lollygagged till her dad died. Now she can't even do it. She doesn't know where the documents are. She doesn't know what village he was born in. She doesn't like she literally wasted time for years just yapping. Yeah, I want to do it. Yeah, I want to do it. Until her dad finally kicked the bucket, and now she doesn't even have access to doing it anymore, right? So you got to execute on these things, or just walk away. Just save yourself the grief. Walk away, go get a job. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with working a job, right? But if you're serious, you need to execute on these things and make them happen before the door shuts in your face and you lose the opportunity. All right. So if you have access to becoming a citizen, do that now. Do it while people are alive. Do it while you can get all the information you need to get. If you're a first generation Brit, you're a first generation, American, but one of your parents is from Kenya, then you need to get your Kenyan citizenship going. Okay. And it's a process, especially if they didn't do a birth notification for you. Right? If they did a birth notification for you, it's actually incredibly easy. Most parents didn't, right? So if they did a birth notification, then that means that your name is in a government record somewhere, right? If they didn't do a birth notification, it's a little bit more difficult, but we can still get it done. But that's by far the best situation for you because you have no restrictions. You don't have to wait for 7 years until you get citizenship. Right, so it's definitely quicker than 7 years. Definitely cheaper than doing a investor permit, or a residency permit. And it's permanent. Like once it's done, it's done. You get your passport. You know what I mean? You're a dual citizen, the whole nine. So do it. If you can do it, do it. Don't be like, the girl I just mentioned and fart around until your parent dies and then you're screwed. And for those of you who are not children of immigrants, a lot of times the reason that these people are screwed is because they've never met their family before, right? So if you're not a child of immigrants, you're like, well, just ask your auntie. There ain't no auntie if you're a child of immigrants, especially if it's first generation. Right? So if your parents both came from another country and you were the first one born in the United States, in the UK, and you ain't even got cousins. You've never even met your cousins. You don't know your auntie. You don't know your uncle. You don't know none of that. Right? So when they go, it's a problem. Right? So we see that a lot. Okay? So if you have the ability to do it, do it. Changes everything. All right? Some of you guys are eligible for citizenships and don't even know it. So when our generational wealth people come through, and they're getting started in their generational wealth trusts and all of that, and they start their passport portfolios, a lot of times they get a passport like within months because there was a passport that they qualified for that they didn't even know they qualified for. There are countries that will give you a passport based on your grandparents, right? So there are countries that will give you a passport based on where your grandparents are from. And that typically becomes the first passport, whether it's a strategic or not. It's a good kind of exercise in what it takes to kick off the passport portfolio. So if there's a freebie and we've had folks that had access to Irish citizenship. We've had folks that had access to Caribbean citizenship, quite a few, through grandparents, not through their parents. right? Now, some places it has to be the parents, some places it has to be both parents, some places it has to be the mom and the dad, doesn't matter. It depends on the country, right? But that's typically the gimme. Typically, there's a citizenship that that person doesn't even know they qualify for, and then that's the first one, and that kind of lets them dip their toe in what the process looks like for each of these passports that they're about to pick up, right? So like within a year, they kind of get that first passport and they're ready to rock. And then we start doing the strategic ones after that. And then, those take either time or money, depending on what the client, is working with. So take a look into that, see if there are passports available for you, and then you can engage with those countries as a citizen. Then it might make sense to do such a thing, right? In the Caribbean, it doesn't typically make sense because they import everything. It's really difficult typically to engage unless you're at a high level with them from a business perspective. So in those situations, it makes sense to get the passport for other reasons, but not necessarily to engage in business, right? So engaging in business isn't necessarily the purpose of picking up that first passport when it's Caribbean. We had a client, oh man, how many years ago was that? 8 years ago. Figure out that they were eligible for Irish citizenship. And that they ended up being able to do business in a place called Shannon, which was booming because it had just gotten a new airport. Yahoo opened an office there. Who else? I think it was Yahoo, Google, and maybe Facebook had just opened an office in this little kind of city called Shannon. And they were able to step into that. They had a tech business. They were able to step into that and engage with Ireland as a citizen. And then through that engagement, they were able to engage with the EU, right? Because the UK did Brexit, but Ireland didn't. So they were able to engage with the EU, which really took their business to another level because now all of a sudden they were an EU citizen, right? And didn't even know it. It was one grandparent, and they were able to, with the Irish, laws, at least at that time, I don't know if they've changed, but with the Irish laws, they were able to claim citizenship by hereditary citizenship off of that one grandparent that they didn't even know was Irish, right? So there's a lot of folks, a lot of black folks that qualify for Nova Scotian citizenship due to the Civil War, that their ancestors may have fought for the British, and then or not the Civil War, the Independence War, but that may have fought for the British, and then there was a what was it? There was like an amnesty that the British offered any slaves that fought for them that they would be relocated, and a lot of them were relocated to Nova Scotia, right? So there's this whole section of Black Americans that were Black Americans, in slavery times that fought for the British because slavery was illegal in England, already. And then the British lost, obviously, that's why there is United States of America. But they honored their word and relocated all the people who fought for them that didn't have a claim from a slave master on them. That's a whole nother story. And relocated them to Nova Scotia. Right, so there are claims that can get, can get certain people citizenship in Canada and stuff like that through those claims, right? So there's all kinds of things that you may not even know exist that grant you additional citizenships once you start looking into it. So that's typically the first expansion that you get. What, is it easy to get diplomatic immunity passport if you're an ambassador? Which it actually is easy to become. Now, just costs money. Typically, ambassadorships are bought. They're not earned. So typically you buy an ambassadorship, at least in the U.S. system. So if you're the ambassador to a country, then you have diplomatic immunity. Your family doesn't, right? It's not like the movies where the son of the ambassador has diplomatic immunity. He doesn't. Only the ambassador has diplomatic immunity. But you can buy an ambassadorship if you got the money. Yeah, it's actually public knowledge. Just people don't look into it. You can just buy an ambassadorship. Typically, ambassadors are like major donors to presidential campaigns. Yeah. What's the next passport after the gimme? So the next passport after the gimme depends on your strategy. So if you're building out that passport portfolio, the next passport depends on whatever it is that is your goal. Like, what do you want at the end of your passport portfolio? What do you want the portfolio to do for you? That's going to dictate what the next passport is. I wouldn't even be able to tell. So there's not a last passport portfolio client. They typically come in groups, because typically we'll do like a family constitution workshop. There'll be like 20 people in the workshop, and then those people will get their family generational wealth trust right after the workshop, and then those folks will then start their passport portfolio. So it's not like, oh, the last guy, you know what I mean? But trying to think if there's like one that everybody kind of gets first. Not really. Maybe it's split 4 ways. I would say most people either get Grenada or Vanuatu first. One of those two. So after any kind of hereditary passport claim or anything like that, they either get Vanuatu citizenship or Grenadian citizenship next. So there's a healthy split between, those folks. And then some folks, it's Malta, depending on their background and where they come from. Trying to think of another one that's often first. The issue is there's such a wide variety of people who start the passport portfolios. So like if you start a passport portfolio, but you're coming from a place of needing a not a generational wealth trust, but an asset protection trust, that means you're a millionaire. If you need an asset protection trust, you're a millionaire. So we've had people on that side, and then the first passport was actually Singapore, which takes 10 years, right? But it made sense for them because what they were doing. So it's really hard to be like, oh, everybody gets this one first. That's not true. All right? It just really depends on whatever it is that you're aiming to accomplish. But Vanuatu and Grenada are easy. Grenada is typically what folks that are into international like finance would get first. And then like international traders might get Vanuatu first. Grenadian citizenship would give you access to the EC Bank, which is a very, very stable bank, which is why people are attracted to that citizenship. Vanuatu would give you access to like almost like offshore style companies, right? Corporate structures, corporate profits, and stuff like that. So international trader, Vanuatu might be more attractive, more attractive than Grenada as a starting place. Typically people circle back to both of them. So eventually the Vanuatu person gets a Grenadian passport, and eventually the Grenadian person gets a Vanuatu passport. So those two passports are in almost everyone's portfolio. But there is no like, after whatever hereditary passport you may or may not, qualify for, this is the next one. It just depends on whatever your plan is. I would be leery of anyone who is even like talking that way. If they're like, yeah, this is what you get first and this is what you get next, and they don't even know your name, like just some random head on TikTok telling you exactly what you need next, I'd be very leery of that. you really got to get into someone's goals, number one, and then their current situation, number two, to move forward. Because there are things that are easy but expensive, right? So like Grand Cayman Islands passport is simple, but you need like a $500,000 to do it, right? So it's expensive, but it's really easy to get, right? If you have the money. Versus, oh man, Grenada, depending on how you're getting it, can be under six figures, right? Same with Vanuatu, right? And then you can have passports where it's way less than that, but it takes 7 years, right? So it's always give and take, and then your plan is going to dictate, where do you go first. Sometimes you go to the passport that you're going to get seventh, and you start that first because of how many years it takes to get it, and then you follow your plan, and then even though the one that you started first is going to take forever, the last one you did it ends up being the first passport you get, right? But everything else is in queue, and all the paperwork has been started, and everything that you have to do has been started to get there. So a good example of that is the Hong Kong SAR passport. Hong Kong has its own passport that's not a Chinese passport. In order to qualify for the Hong Kong passport, you need to own property in Hong Kong for 10 years, right? So, and property in Hong Kong is not cheap. It's like owning property in Manhattan. So that's one of those things where somebody has a need for Hong Kong citizenship and Hong Kong SAR passport, they would start that first. Like they would buy the Hong Kong property first, and then go back and apply for whatever else it is that's on their path and their journey, because they're going to get those other things before they qualify for Hong Kong, but they need to get the clock started, right? Same thing with like Seychelles. Same thing with Singapore, but Singapore is a little more complicated because you have to give up all other nationalities to get Singapore. But same thing with like Seychelles, you need 10 years, right? And in Seychelles, it's tougher because you need 10 years and you need to like be there half the year, every year, or even more to qualify. So you have to plan these things properly so that the places that you have to physically actually live in for X amount of time, you hit that requirement, and the places where you don't have to live there at all, you're doing those things at the same time so that everything comes together when you need it to come together, right? A lot of folks, depending on, their goals, they'll get 4 or 5 passports in the same year, but it'll take them 7, 8 years to like even start getting their passport portfolio going beyond the kind of gimme one that they might have qualified for through heredity. All right. Good question though, in spirit. Like I get it. Like, what's the first thing I got to do to blah, 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 blah. Typically though, specific questions, there's no way that I could honestly, or anyone else could honestly answer them because they depend on whatever's going on in your life. So if it's a specific question, then I need to know your specific tax bracket. I need to know your specific, business situation. I need to know your specific financial situation, right? So when you're talking about building out an actual passport portfolio strategy and what comes first, it changes for everybody. The only give me answer is like blood. If you have a hereditary claim to a nationality, that comes first because that's always easier. It's always like less than a year and you're good to go. I don't know any hereditary claims that take longer than a year. So if it's a full-on hereditary claim, it's typically done within 12 months. Well, yeah, it's also, it becomes the easiest one to give to your kids too, because then maybe they were outside of the claim until you claimed yours, because especially like if you're claiming based on grandparents, well, maybe the law doesn't say great grandparents, but you're within the range of the law because it's your grandparents who were whatever, right? So you make your claim, now you're a citizen, now the law extends all the way to your grandkids because now you're the grandparent, right? So the instant you get yours, your wife gets hers, or vice versa. Your husband gets his, and your kids get theirs, and it pushes it, down the line even more. Which is the whole point of a passport portfolio, is that you pass it on as part of the generational wealth, right? So, yeah, as soon as you get it, it tends to extend the eligibility down the family. The only one that works a little bit differently off the top of my head is US. Because for the US, in order to transmit citizenship, you have to live in the United States for a amount of time before the birth of the child. And, well, this kind of goes without saying. I'm not sure why they put this in the law. But so many of the years have to be above the age of like 14, which is weird because I don't know too many 12-year-olds who are out there making kids. So I don't think that needed to be said. But you have to be living in the United States for, I think it's like 5 years, 3 of which have to be above the age of 14, right? In order to be able to transmit citizenship, right? And it can't be like the 5 years after the kid was born. So, like, my kid was not born in the United States, but I transmitted my U.S. citizenship to my kid because I was born in the United States. But he can't. Right now he's 21 months old, right? He ain't having no babies anytime soon. But when he does decide to have a baby, in the future, if he hasn't lived in the U.S. for 5 years, he won't be able to transmit, right? His citizenship to his kid. So that's the only one where it doesn't extend, right? So his gaining U.S. citizenship didn't extend the opportunity for U.S. passports in the bloodline, unless he goes and lives there for the 5 years, right? Which typically, especially when it's a passport portfolio situation, typically that's accomplished with college, right? So what'll end up happening is you'll send your kid who's a U.S. citizen to college for a greater than 4-year degree, right? So they'll go, and they typically go to a pretty good college at that point, right? So you send them to college, they go to college for 6 years, come back with a master's degree, and then they have the taxes that they filed all 6 years and whatever they did, FAFSA, whatever, documentation, and then that becomes a proof for their children. So as long as they don't have kids before they go to college, which in dynastatic families that are very serious about their generational wealth, that's very rare, right? Their kids would then acquire the U.S. citizenship because they spent more than 5 years above whatever age in the United States as a U.S. citizen. So then they're able to transfer that citizenship to the next generation. But I can't think of another country where it's like weirdly complicated like that. It's typically either you were born here, therefore you are, or your parents are, therefore you are. It's typically pretty straightforward. Sometimes there's caveats. Like sometimes it's like, okay, if your parents are, you are, but your parents have to let us know you were born. So that's called a birth notification. So sometimes it becomes funky if there was no birth notification. So there are little caveats like that, but typically the first passport you get typically extends to the rest of the family because it's typically a heredity passport. So it's something that you got because an ancestor made you eligible, whether you knew it or not. And most clients don't know it. Like most clients on board and they're like, all right, passport portfolio. And then it's like, oh, hey, cool. You qualify for both of these. Your mom was whatever, your dad was whatever. Both governments allow you. So there's 2 passports right off the bat. They're like, oh, I never knew that. So. Yeah, some are based on mom only, especially if dad is dead. Because the only thing that they can prove is that you came out of your mom. They can't prove that she was loyal to your dad. So some of them are mom only. Now, obviously, if your dad's alive and DNA tests can be taken, whatever. But if dad's gone, then a lot of them are mom only. All right. Okay. We got sidetracked on passport portfolios. Back to business. Where do we leave off? Nonprofits, international traders. We covered. All right. I think we covered all of the business classifications. We did public-private partnership. So there are, an NGO is not like a direct, if you were a non NGO, blah, 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 blah. It's not like a direct conversion. There are other types of business that might suit the nonprofit framework, sometimes even better. So there's something called a CBO, which is a community-based organization. And typically, every member of the community has like a share. So it's almost like a what do they call it? An HMO, not an HMO. What do they call those things? Like a homeowners association, right? It's almost like that, where like the people who own homes are supposed to like get a vote in the homeowners association, whether that happens or not, whatever. But it's almost like that in the sense that everyone in that community gets a vote or benefits, like gets a share of the profit of the organization. And it's a board, and you can't make any decisions by yourself, and so on and so forth. A lot of times, if you're focused on doing a public-private partnership, the CBO is sometimes the way to go because the government prefers to do business with community in that regard. So if you're doing a CBO, it literally means every member of that community, ideally anyway, is a member of the organization. So whatever you're doing with the consent of the constituents in that area, because all the constituents are part of the organization, right? So the government likes to do business with those organizations because then there's typically no protests. You're literally doing what the people want you to do, so, then it all works out. So that might be a way to go as well. You got to have soft skills. There's a whole lot of people involved, whole lot of egos, whole lot of, different attitudes and mindsets and all that, because everybody has a say, right? So it's not the most effective structure, but it obviously has its place, right? So CBOs are something that you could look into to see if that makes sense for what it is you're trying to do. Conservation work tends to work really well with the CBOs, because if you can get a group together as a CBO and you're doing conservation work, then they got to do the work too, right? So like there's a CBO that did what is it called? Oh man, what is it called? There's a plant that is part of the ecosystem and can actually convert salt water into fresh water. And I cannot think of the name of this plant right now. But it creates like boundaries in the ecosystem that solve like things like flooding, create sustainable habitats for wildlife and all of that, right? And so the CBO was able to create a restaurant, right, that's all green, above, it's actually up on stilts. So it's above this kind of natural, structure. And I just can't think of the name of the plant right now. But also they plant more. So all of the members of the community have to come out and like plant more of these, man, why can't I think of the name of the plant? But anyway, plant more of these plants, and these plants enrich the environment dramatically, right? So it's great for all parties involved. But that becomes the labor too, right? So it's like a company where all the shareholders do the labor, right? Which typically you can't do, because typically people doing labor get taxed differently than people who are investing, right? So if you're a shareholder and you're doing the labor, depending on what kind of setup you have, it could actually even be tax evasion, right? So the CBO puts you in a position where all your members could actually do the labor, because it's some sort of like charitable labor. And then it kind of makes sense to have all those voices, involved, because they all also have to do work. So it doesn't necessarily make sense, for example, to have a CBO and then the work you're doing is like you own a hospital. Like, that's going to be horrific, right? But if it's, making sure that there's no deforestation and we plant trees, that might be a great, idea for a CBO. All right, so there's NGOs that can act like nonprofits, and there's CBOs that typically do act like nonprofits as well. So you can figure out which one is going to work best for you. Now, all of the other businesses required an investor's permit. Your NGO and your CBO could use a different permit. Okay, so there is like a permit for like charity workers, essentially, and so you could possibly qualify for that permit instead. But any kind of work in country is going to require some sort of permit. If you're working out of the country, not so much. What if you work outside of the country but your clients are Kenyan? You need a permit. Yeah, if you're interacting with Kenyans, even if your company is outside, you need a permit. Or citizenship. If you need citizenship, you don't need any permits. Well, that's part of the generational wealth in the passport portfolio, right? If your kid has the ability to go to the UK and just open a business, and his competitor can't enter the UK market without a permit because they're not a citizen, who has the advantage? That's part of what the passport portfolio structure is all about. It's to make sure that as your family continues and as your generational wealth grows, their first mover advantage also grows. They're able to just enter the EU because they have an EU passport. They're able to enter, East Africa because they have an East African passport. They're able to enter the United States because they have a U.S. passport and just open a business, no questions asked, because they're citizens of all those locations and they can operate as a citizen. So that's part of one of the multitude of benefits that you get from the passport portfolio. Other benefit? Well, one of the biggest other benefits is access to capital markets, right? Things like 529B, right? You got to be a citizen of the United States. There are certain things that you can invest in, but 529B is not one of them, right? So it's a college deferred savings plan, tax deferred college savings plan, actually, right? So when that kind of exists for all markets. There are things in those markets that are, for their citizens, that aren't for any other citizens, right? And so there are certain things also that you can pay off, right? Like you can pay off Social Security, right? Plenty of people of means literally max out their Social Security as soon as they get their means, and they never have to pay it again, right? There are certain taxes that go on forever and certain taxes that don't. Social Security is one of the ones that don't, right? So we have clients that their Social Security or their pension fund in multiple countries is already maxed out. So when they hit whatever age, that they need to hit, they're getting a U.S. Social Security check, a U.K. pension fund, an EU check from Malta. Like there's a bunch of checks that they're already going to get when they're older. So if things go upside down, if the worst case scenario happens that the whole family trust goes broke or whatever, by the time they get to that point, they got 4 or 5 Social Security checks coming from 4 or 5 governments that they've earned. They paid in and maxed out those accounts, and now they're waiting for those payments to hit, right? So there's all kinds of little ancillary benefits that come with the passport portfolio. My son will be in the same boat, right? There's something called NSSF here, which is the National Social Security Fund. So they have Social Security here. He's a Kenyan citizen. He's also an American citizen. So he has Social Security, from the United States. So both of those accounts will be maxed out by his trust, and when it comes time, for him to collect on those, he'll be collecting 2 essentially passive checks in his elder years from both of those programs, because he has citizenship with both of those programs. He has other citizenships as well that offer, other incentives as well. So that's essentially how that works. Most countries don't tax you on your worldwide income unless you're in country, right? So the only country whose citizenship he has right now that would start doing that at 18 for him would be the United States. The other countries that he has citizenship for currently would not tax him unless he was living there more than 183 days a year, or an aggregate of 122 days over 3 years. 122 days per year, averaged over 3 years. So they would essentially, you have to be a tax resident for them to even attempt to, tax you on your worldwide income. Not only, but the United States, North Korea, and Eritrea are the only 3 countries that tax you whether you're there or not. It's not really a big deal. I mean, it's stupid. I think it should be reformed, but on the American side, it's not really a big deal because you have so many exclusions and deductions. I don't know anyone who actually pays taxes. Everybody files a tax return. Like everybody I know complies with the law, right? So they file their tax return, but I don't know anyone who actually pays the taxes. So what ends up happening is the first thing is typically the foreign earned income exclusion. That excludes the first $130,000 of foreign income from U.S. taxes. So when you file, making less than $130,000, which only 13% of Americans make above $130,000, right? So, there's the TikTok liars that everybody's making 600,000 and 600,000 is the new minimum wage bullshit. And then there's the actual IRS records that indicate that only 13% of the country makes over $130,000 a year. So, the vast majority of people be underneath that exclusion and wouldn't have to pay a dime because they'd be under, 130,000. Now, for those who are above the 13% or the 16% who are above 130,000, then there's something called the FTC, foreign tax credit. If you're above 130,000, there's a good chance that you have to pay taxes in the country you're living in as well. So there's a dollar-to-dollar deduction for those taxes that you paid up to 90%. So up to 90% of what you paid in the other country will be deducted from your tax liability in the U.S. Right? So when it's stupid that we are taxed globally, except they don't actually make money. It's almost like a tracking mechanism more than it is a tax revenue mechanism. So it doesn't really matter. Oh, that's a great question. Yes, the answer is yes. So there are corporate versions of all of those things, right? So there's a corporate FTC that would also apply to business. So yes. Hey, Lynn, how are you? There's also some things that are only corporate, right? So there's the what is it? There is the dividend received deduction. Well, dividend received deduction is domestic. So if you're an American, your domestic companies that pay dividends to your C corp, only your C corp, can be 100% tax deductible, or just a tax-free deduction at that point. But there is an F DRD. So there's a foreign dividends received deduction. The requirements are a little different. So if it's domestic, you have to hold the shares up to, it has to be 10% at least of the subordinate companies for, I think it's 60 days, so not very long. But the foreign one, you have to hold the shares for 365 days. So when you do it becomes a strategic matter, right? So, for example, the end of the year is right around the corner. So we got a lot of clients that on the last day of December, they're going to acquire 10% of their Kenyan companies that were just formed, um, this month or last month, right? And so, but they haven't accepted the stock of those companies yet. So on the very, very last day of December, they're going to go ahead and do that. Now, there's a timing difference between the countries, right? So there's a strategic thing that happens there to make sure, okay, by the time this conversion went through, it was already the next year in this country. Might have still been the last year of last year in this country. And then, there's a strategic workout that can happen there so that there's not a tax liability for one day from the IRS, and there's not a tax liability, from KRA or from wherever it is, right? And then you end up, by the time it's time to file the next taxes, you've held those shares long enough that you qualify for the foreign dividend received deduction, which would be 100% tax-free dividends from that foreign company, right? So again, your planning, it all boils down to your planning and your current situation. But yeah, good question. You're thinking deeper than the surface. That's always good. Whatever you know best, right? Whatever. Oh, the question was what kind of businesses succeed here. Whatever you know best. All right. If you don't know it, then your strategy has to be different. All right. So if you don't know it, then you can buy businesses. Okay, and then you have to have a merger acquisition team. You can't just do it on your own. You can buy businesses, and have a merger acquisitions team. Set it up so that you retain talent. Okay, so you can buy businesses and you have no clue how they work. It's done all the time, but you need a merger acquisitions team, so that you retain talent, and so that part of that buyout is that certain key people have to keep on working for 2 years or whatever the case may be, and train somebody to take their place, yada yada yada. So you can definitely own a bunch of businesses that you don't even know how to run. You can do that. Outside of doing that, it's whatever you know the best. Okay, it's whatever you know the best. Typically, as far as buying businesses is concerned, that's an activity that a lot of people's trust funds do for them, because the trustee will handle the merger acquisition and then will manage those operations. So that's typically something that a generational wealth trust trustee will handle for those folks that are focused on their generational wealth. But those are the two ways. So if you it doesn't necessarily have to be that you know it best because you did it in business, right? We had a guy who worked at Dunkin' Donuts and made $128 million on a export deal, exporting coffee from Kenya to the United States. So it's not necessarily like you know it best as an owner or as a business person, just that you know the industry well. There was a guy, what did he do? It was something to do with like importing either whole engines or engine parts or something like that. But he worked at the Advanced Auto Warehouse for years, like 10 years at the Advanced Auto Warehouse. So he actually understood auto parts, but he wasn't the manager of the warehouse. He didn't own the Advanced Auto franchise. You know what I mean? So it's not that you have to know it from a place of, I once ran this business, or I was once a manager, or I was once you just got to know that industry. Because data is a funny thing. You can actually do due diligence and have a ton of data, and either none of it's useful or you don't know how to interpret it because you're not from that industry. So you can have all the data in the world and not know how to read it. So understanding whatever industry you're getting into is typically critical. The more money you have, the less critical it becomes, because then you can just hire CEOs to do it. Yeah, exactly. So as the trust fund, as generational trust fund compounds, the trust can just hire people to handle it. What would I do? Let me think about that. If I had to start a new business right now, it would probably be something mobile that provided value to clients without them having to come to me. Um, you know what? I would probably do like there used to be this company, I don't know if it still exists, but when your windshield got cracked, you could call this company and they would like pump some kind of resin into the crack in your windshield that would fix it for obviously less than the price of buying a new windshield, right? That was the whole point of the service. But they would like drive out to you, like they do it in your driveway. It's called Safe Light. And so they drive out to your driveway. They'd actually typically make the crack bigger. So they'd come with a tool and like actually break the crack open some more and then pump this resin into it. And it would be seamless. It would, there wouldn't be a seam. You couldn't like see where the crack used to be. It's 100% crack repair on the spot. And it was so good that U.S. insurance would actually pay for it at a certain point. Like they got to a point where U.S. insurance was like, yeah, we don't have to pay for a windshield. Go ahead and do the Safe Light repair. That's the kind of thing. I don't even think that's available here at all, right? So that's the kind of thing that I would do, where I would have some sort of concierge service that I could go to the client directly and perform that service for that client at a premium, of course, and do something like that. I probably wouldn't open a brick and mortar or anything at this point. My wife is completely different, though. She wanted to do a brick and mortar clothing shop, so that's what I bought her, and she's doing really, really good with that because that's what she likes to do. So Still does depend on who you are, your mentality, and your mindset, and all of that. But for me, if you're asking me what I would do some service like that. You remember them? Yeah, I don't know if they're still in business or not. I would I would assume someone bought them. Okay, sorry about that, YouTube. The live just ended. All right, don't know what that was. All right. Is it still raining? No, it's not. Oh, the noise. There's one roof drainage pipe that that takes all the water off of the hidden roof. So that's what you're still hearing. But it was raining when we started this an hour and a half ago, huh? All right. Any other questions? VC. I mean, you can always do VC. Are you talking about being a VC, or are you talking about getting VC funding? I mean, both are possible, but they're two different conversations. VC funding. Yeah, yeah, no, you can do that. It depends on where you're trying to get the VC funding from. A lot of folks still lean on like US VC firms, in which case you're going to have to typically open up a C Corp, a Delaware C Corp for those guys, unfortunately, but yeah. The meat guy story, very inspiring. I don't know which meat guy you're talking about. Typically I talk about the coffee guy, but I don't know which meat guy you mean. Meat guy. Yeah. I don't even think if we even have a client in that industry. Oh, that's coffee. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not 128. It's a 1.28 million. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, the guy was a Dunkin' Donuts worker, but he knew coffee really, really well. However, he did not do it the right way, right? So we told him not to immigrate because he didn't have a lot of money. We told him, like, just wait, save up your money, whatever. He was really, really tired, super depressed of the United States, and was like, F it, I'm taking a leap of faith. He moved. Had very little money, to his name, considering you just immigrated to a new country. I think he had less than $10,000, like maybe $9,000 or $8,000. And so with him, what he did was he went and linked up with a bunch of farmers in Caricho, coffee farmers. And at first, he was calling all the wrong people. Like he was like calling Walmart, like, "Oh, I have the best coffee beans. Can I sell these?" And they were like, "No, like call procurement. Like we don't even do that." And so with these big companies, that is what you run into. They have buyers. They have corporate buyers and a procurement department, and you got to go through negotiations, and it takes months, and then sign a deal, an exclusive contract, and blah 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 blah. So he was going about it the wrong way, but he'd never done business before. But he did have the right mentality. That was super important. I remember when he came when he came to us, and he was like, "I just got my 1,000th no." And I was like, "You're what?" He's like, "Yeah, I've been keeping track of all the people who've been telling me no. I just got told no my 1,000th time." We were like, "Holy shit!" So he did have the right like mentality. He's like, "I'm closer to a yes," which was great, and it did eventually pay off. But the good thing was because he had the right mentality, he ended up building the knowledge necessary to actually execute on his plan. So what ended up happening was he stumbled across the realization that the only target client that was interested in what he was actually providing were small coffee houses. A lot of them weren't even coffee houses per se. A lot of them were like not cafes, like bakeries. But part of how they drew in their clientele was they had their own coffee roaster. And so every morning they get up, I don't know, 5 in the morning or something, and start roasting coffee. And the smell of the roasted coffee would kind of waft out into the community and bring people in, into the shop. And then they get, whatever, a croissant and a coffee. But the people that were coming into these shops were like coffee snobs, right? So they knew like what Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee was. They knew that coffee started in Ethiopia. They knew that Kenyan coffee was amongst the best coffee in the world. Ugandan coffee amongst the best coffee in the world. They knew these things. Whereas you try to call Walmart and be like, I got the best coffee in the world. They don't care, right? But these people do. So he was able to do his deal with quite a few. It was like 21, 20, 26 or something like that of these small kind of boutique coffee shops. And he ran that through XM Bank. So what happened with XM Bank was they ended up during their due diligence offering, I believe, every single one of those U.S. shops what do they call it? Working capital lines of credit. So all of those shops, by being in negotiations with this guy, actually ended up getting a government working capital line of credit extended to them that they didn't even know was available. So that, helped his credibility a great deal, actually. And then they typically use that working capital to make the purchase with him. And then XM Bank ensured they gave him the loans that he needed and insured everything for the shipment and all of that. And then that was it. So his first deal was $1.27 million. So yeah, took 18 months though. 18 months, a lot of hard work, calling 12, 16 hours a day, people cussing you out and telling you no. And you like smiling and moving on to the next one. So not a lot of people will be able to do that, number one. And most people, he was in danger. You know what I mean? By the time he made that deal, he might have had, I don't know, 2,000 left, of the 8,000 or 9,000 that he had. So that goes to show you that if you're willing to like live on the lam, I wouldn't recommend it again. But if you're willing to live on the lam, like you could just have a few $1,000s and live here for a couple years. You ain't living well, mind you. But if you're a person like him who's willing to like sleep on the floor, to make your dream happen, now he has a really nice mansion in Malindi and he spends his days on the beach. So, what is that? Tino, he flipped 10K. No, he lived off the 10K. He used no money for that deal whatsoever. He financed the deal through XM Bank, utilizing purchase orders, which is why during the due diligence on the purchase orders, all of those purchasers were offered working capital by XM Bank, because XM Bank had to go in and do the due diligence on each and every one of those purchase orders to make sure they weren't fake. So there was his credit didn't matter. He financed the whole deal off of the purchase orders with those buyers. So he didn't flip anything. He was living off of the 10K just so he could eat and have a place to sleep out here. And he was making free phone calls or using Google Voice and Wi-Fi. So he would go to places that had a Wi-Fi and like order like a coffee and sit there for 8 hours, making Google Voice phone calls. Like he was really, really trying to just get out of the rat race, and he was very motivated to do it. That's not normal. In 12 years, he's the only person I've ever seen with that kind of dedication to like, F this, there's a better way, and I'm going to figure it out. So, a lot of people talk like they'll do whatever it takes and then, go back to sleep and eat another Twinkie. There's very few people who are going to get in the gym and get the work done. So while, yes, it is an inspiring story, we definitely don't recommend that people take the last little bit of money they have and jump off a cliff and, expect it to work before they land. But he did. it is what it is. But yeah, in 12 years, he's the only one that we've ever seen do that. Typically, you either create yourself a safety net like the bond laddering, but you need money for bond laddering, you know what I mean? But the bond laddering people don't have to worry about money for the next 10 years, so they're good and they can focus on whatever passion it is they want to focus on. And then we used to do like government contracting and then move into prime contracting, but Doge kind of destroyed that. So that's suspended from our side anyway. People still, engage in it and whatever. But for us, we feel like it would take so long for it to take off the way it used to. It used to be like if somebody was on it for 6 months, they would get a contract. Like within 6 months, they would typically get a contract. And then they'd have to make it through that contract and learn by doing and all of that stuff. And then by the time they got the second contract, they could sub it. As long as the contract allowed for subbing. Some contracts don't. And then once they subbed it, they can go wherever the hell they want, right? Your company got the contract, not you, right? So you can go live in any country you want. Your company is still paying you, you know what I mean? You're subbing out that work, and so you're making 15-20% off the top. And that 15-20% off the top is keeping you alive. So there are all kinds of different ways to do it, but typically people plan things out a little bit better than he did. But I mean, where there's a will, there's definitely a way. So if you actually are ready to shut up and put up and really get into it, you can do anything. It's just that it's incredibly rare. Again, 12 years, we've only met one person like that. So definitely not typical results. But a lot of people do really, really well after the bond laddering, right? Again, mentality matters, mindset matters. We can tell immediately who's just going to not work for the next 10 years and then be in a crisis when the 10 years is over and they've spent all the money, and who's going to be set for life off of like the bond laddering. But regardless of what type of person they are, it definitely changes like their stress level. It definitely changes their outlook on life. And they typically do at least lean into a passion. Whether or not they make that passion profitable is a different story, but they typically try to do something they've always wanted to do as soon as they don't have to worry about money anymore. It's also a very easy way to kind of build the right mindset. You don't have to worry about money anymore. It's pretty easy to be positive about the other things that you're trying to do because, all your bills are paid. So, there's that. It's definitely easy mode, but the easier something is, the more money you need to do it, right? The less money you have, the harder the way to do it becomes. Oh, well, yeah, no, sure. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can derail you. Typically, romance is number one on that list. Learning is the number one skill. When something happens, you got to learn quickly, all right? And then I guess the action related to the learning would be adaptation. So something happens, you got to learn quickly and then adapt to what you learned. That's the number one skill. Example, when Trump did his tariff nonsense with China and bumped their tariffs up to 140%, AGOA was still in effect. It's expired now. Was still in effect at that moment. So folks that could immediately adapt into manufacturing and were able to manufacture things like t-shirts under AGOA, which AGOA made them 100% tariff free. So for the first time in the last 20 years, they were able to beat China on price because of the 140% tariff and actually take some of their market share, right? But they had to act immediately. They couldn't just talk about it and, oh yeah, that's a real great idea, and not do anything about it, because there was what, 3 months where that was viable, right? And so if you're not willing to learn from what's going on and all you're doing is complaining about it, like, oh, this idiot, why would he do the tear down? American people have to pay. So a lot of people did that for 3 months, right? And people who could learn and adapt were like, okay, this is what it is. Yeah, he's an idiot, but I'm going to make $1 million off of his idiot move, right? That I couldn't have made before. So that ability to adapt and move and get something done versus talking about getting something done is literally the number one skill for anybody who's in business. Whether they're an entrepreneur or just a business owner, it's absolutely going to be their number one skill. Most people, at least 90%, if not more, just talk, and they never do. And that's why the percentages are always the same. No matter how far back in history you look that we have records for, there's always a top 10% and a bottom 90%. And the percentages are always the same because most people won't do anything. They'll complain, they'll talk, they won't do anything, and there's 10% of people that'll put in all the work, and then they get everything, and then people pretend it's unfair, knowing damn well they didn't do a thing to improve their life at all. And just that's the way it's always been. Oh yeah, sure. There's all kinds of boundaries. That like part of some excuses are legitimate. They're still excuses, right? But some excuses are legitimate, right? So, for example, in the United States, there were a couple what people kind of colloquially call group economics. There were a couple like group economics deals that we wanted to do, just standard, straight up deals, right? They were illegal in the United States because everything in the United States has a basis of racism, unfortunately. So a basis of racism. And so there's a rule in the United States that restricts the citizens' ability to be part of what's actually called syndications, which is group economics, right? But legally, it's actually called a syndication. So it restricts who's allowed to be part of a syndication to something called a qualified investor. And if you look at what a qualified investor is, they're a millionaire who's not allowed to count their personal residence as part of their millionairehood. And they had to make, and it depends, like the number changes if you're married or not, but they had to make like $200,000 a year in the 2 years preceding the group economics and expect to make $200,000 a year the year of the group economics, right? So you could go win the Powerball, right? And what's the statistic on that? Within 2 years, the Powerball, the lottery winners are broke, right? You need 3 years, right? So you could go win the lottery, $50 million, you're still not a qualified investor. Still illegal for you to get involved in that syndication. You're not allowed to advertise them. Right? So there's actually a rule that you have to know the person, prior to talking about the syndication with them, right? This is all, go Google it, right? So is it an excuse? Sure. It's an excuse that like, I can't, start this business I want to do because the group economics, so what we do, we left the country. We did the group economics somewhere where the rules weren't based in racism, right? And so, you didn't have to be a millionaire not counting your personal residence and make $200,000 a year, even though only 12% of Americans make, that amount of money, if not less. You'd think based on TikTok and YouTube, 80% made over $200,000 a year, but You know, it's less than 15%. And so the last time we looked at the statistics, it was like something like 16% of white people qualified and like 6% of black people, or even less, like 3 or something like that. So it was like you're in the club or you're not, and that was real. You know what I mean? It was valid, but it was still an excuse because there was still obviously a way to get around that. Which, and more than one, we chose to leave and go to a country that wasn't rooted in racism and do our thing there. But you could have also gotten like a license, right? Like if you got like a series like a Series 65 license, or Series 7 is hard and expensive. But if you got one of the life insurance security licenses that are a little bit more reasonable or whatever, then having that license might make you a qualified investor, right? So there are little ways around it. But that doesn't mean that the excuse isn't valid. It's just whether or not valid or not, whether you're willing to do what you got to do to get it done anyway, right? So that ends up being what what you're looking at and what happens with mindset is that yes, the excuse might be real, there might be something working against you, but there's a way around it if you train your mind to essentially see the silver linings on everything. So that's worked for all of our clients, and that's how it worked for me personally. That's one of the reasons I left the United States, is so that these glass ceilings that people rarely even know exist could stop limiting me. So yeah, that's it. But it was valid. It was it wasn't a fake or delusional excuse. It was a valid excuse. There's just other ways to do it. I almost choked on that, Henrock. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Maybe double. Well, more affordable than what? Are you talking about the United States? Or are you talking about Kenya? If you're talking about the United States, yes. But if you're talking about Kenya, absolutely not. No. I mean, you could have, so okay. So Khalees is here in Kenya, right? She actually partners with one of my friends' businesses, right? And so she's here, she's doing her thing. For her, she was like, "Oh, it's more expensive, here, or just as expensive, or whatever." Right now, mind you, she entered the economy as a U.S. millionaire. She has a U.S. millionaire lifestyle, right? Her kids, I don't know if they're all Nas's kids, but her kids' father is also a millionaire, right? So she's maintaining a millionaire lifestyle from a country that caters to millionaires in a country that doesn't cater to millionaires. And so it's just as expensive or more expensive for her. That is not the truth for standard people, right? So for most people, it's way less expensive to maintain their lifestyle, right? Because they probably have a middle class lifestyle, which this country does cater to middle class, and so it's a whole different, situation. And so, it kind of depends on what it is that you're doing. But over there in that country that you just named, no, it's crazy. Because there's a whole different economy for you, right? So, comparatively speaking, it's really not even a comparison. Especially if you leave the city. Like if you're in Nairobi, which is what Khalees was talking about. If you're in Nairobi and trying to like live the highest tier lifestyle, there's a cost that comes with that. But if you're not, in Kenya's version of Manhattan, trying to live the highest tier lifestyle, it's way, way cheaper. Like I guess just to put that into perspective, most of our clients that build like houses with us when they relocate, so they already have their house, they typically own their car, all that stuff they own outright, they're living on like $500 a month, maybe. You know what I mean? Because they don't have any bills. There's no property tax if it's agricultural land. They don't have an electric bill necessarily because they're using solar off grid. They don't have a water bill because they have their own well. They don't have a sewer bill because they have their own biodigester, right? So the only bill they have is internet and Netflix. They own their own car, so they have their insurance payments and all of that, and their groceries. Like that's it. That's their bills at that point, right? So they're spending like not even $500 a month. They're spending like 380 approximately on average, right, per month. So at that point, how could you possibly say that that's more expensive than, you know what I mean? Whereas in that other place you just mentioned, a lot of the reports that we're getting from clients that move from there to here is that they're spending 1,200, which might still be better than the, you know, 2,000 or 2,500 they were spending in DC or a place like that. But you can move to like Reading, Pennsylvania, and do better than 1,200 a month in a place like that. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things. I don't know anywhere in the United States. I'm sure there's some armpit of somewhere, but I don't know anywhere in the United States where you could do better than $380 a month. You know what I mean? So very, very big difference. What's going on, Jay Rivera? Good to see you, man. Whoa, what is going on YouTube? That's interesting. How's it going? Is that real? There are 13,000 people watching on YouTube right now? That's crazy. That has to be a glitch. What is going on over there? I'm even getting a viewer limit reached. Huh. That's pretty interesting. All right, YouTube. Get more subscribers to get more viewers so that next time you go live. Okay. Yeah, man, good to see you. How's it going, Hiram? Good to see you. Man, that's really interesting. What am I? Here, let me show you. Let me turn this camera around and show you. I've never seen this before, but that's cool. Look at that. YouTube is saying that there's 11,805 people in the YouTube live right now. That's wild. So sorry, that's what distracted me. All right. All right. TikTok is saying there's like 7. Okay. Oh, all right. Here comes the right. Yes. What's your question about that? Oh, okay. So that's all right. So we were talking about the different types of businesses and all of that stuff. Yeah, I'm 100% with you there, Tenno. Yeah, I can't imagine that it's anything but that. Um, but so they're not formation structures. Even in the United States, people really get that twisted, right? So people they'll act like a C corp is a formation structure. The formation structure is a corporation. The C is the section of the tax code that you're using to pay taxes on that corporation. An S corp is the same thing. It's just a corporation. The S is the chapter of the tax code that you're using to pay taxes on the corporation, right? Same thing with like nonprofit corporations to an extent. It's still just a corporation. Depending on what state you form the corporation in, they may have like a special formation, like, hey, do you intend on becoming a 501c3 charitable organization, right? Because if you do, then we might as well not even issue shares. Like we might as well just skip that part of the corporate formation. Because when you're doing a nonprofit in that way, no one owns a nonprofit, which people tend to find out the hard way when their board kicks them out of the nonprofit they started because they don't own it. There is no equity. That's part of what you give up in order to get the tax exempt status, right? But it's still just a corporation, right? So the S's and the C's, those are like tax situations. They're not, structural formation situations typically. And it might have an effect on your state taxes too. So your state might also make a distinction between C and S because they've adopted, some of maybe the federal tax code for their state tax code or whatever. But those designators are tax designations, right? So you're either a corporation, which might be a public benefit corporation, might be a nonprofit corporation. If you're in New York, you might call a nonprofit corporation a not-for-profit corporation. So the different states might call things different things, right? Or you're a partnership, right? Or you're a limited liability company, or you're a sole proprietor, right? Those are essentially your formation structures. So all the other things are either certifications or tax distinctions that are being thrown on top. And then now you're expanding into another country, so the terminology is different, right? So like here, there really isn't corporations, right? Everything is a limited company. So it's either a company limited by shares or it's a company limited by assets. And then it's either private or public, right? So you could have a public company limited by shares, public company limited by assets, private company limited by shares, private company limited by assets. Or you could have a partnership. So you could have a limited liability partnership, right? Or you can still have a sole proprietorship. Or you can have a general partnership, which are essentially the two worst formations, right? Because you have unlimited liability in both of those formations. So if you're a sole proprietor, you have unlimited liability to the business. If you're a general partnership, your partnership has unlimited liability to the business. All right, so that's how it actually works. So all those other kind of designations are either certifications, like if you're an NGO, you were certified an NGO by the NGO board in that country, right? Typically. Right, so somebody certified you. All right, you're an NGO, and so then you move forward from there. But if you go to like your business registration services, very rarely is there going to be a registration option for NGO, right? So you're going to register a business, and then you're going to go and have that business or company certified as an NGO, right? So those are the things that do kind of get confusing to onlookers, where they think that maybe a certification is actually a business formation, which is not necessarily true. It's typically not true. Good morning, how are you? Any other questions? What's YouTube looking like? It says 14,000. So I think it's a bunch of bots. Any other questions? Good question. So when I get my visa denied, I file a case with your legal team? I'm a bit confused. Why would your visa? Well, there's no visa for Kenya. There's what's called an electronic travel authorization, and I couldn't imagine why it would be denied. So yeah, and typically, if it is denied, most countries don't have an appeal system. You just have to apply again. Because visas you don't have a legal right to, because you're not a citizen. So for countries that have visas, if they get denied, like if you try to go to America and you apply for a B2, B1 visa and they deny it, you will not get a refund. and there is no way to like appeal to like an authority to have it reviewed because you don't have a right to the visa. So I don't know why it would get denied, number one. And then number two, if it were to get denied, there's probably no appeal mechanism. So if you're concerned, if there's something in your background that might cause it to be denied, you want to engage a legal team first and let that legal team, do whatever it has to do to make your case stronger. My organization does relocations. Relocations require a permit, not a visa. Maybe that's where your confusion is. Visas allow entry into a country. That is it. Visas do not give you any powers in that country, do not give you any rights in that country. All they allow is entry at a border checkpoint. That's all a visa does. Once you pass that entry, if you're planning on immigrating to that place, you typically need some sort of permit, right? So like in America, there's something called a green card. A green card is just like the colloquial name for a residency permit. There's a temporary residency permit. Temporary green card is 2 years, and then there's a permanent green card is 10 years, right? And then you are a resident, a permanent resident of the United States. You have a resident permit that we call a green card, right? So our immigration firm gets you a permit. That's a whole different situation. But our legal team would file that permit. So at that point, there's no reason why you would be denied unless you lied to us, which has happened once or twice. So if you lie to us, then our lawyers, input, documentation, and then they do a background check and they find the truth that you hid from us, then you may get denied. But outside of that, we've never had a denial. So yeah, if you're concerned about being denied, that typically indicates that there's something in the background, which you do not have to disclose here, but make sure that if you do engage with us or any other legal team, that you do disclose whatever it is you're concerned about getting denied about. Help people who are, a big chunk of our clients are U.S., not quite half, but around 40% of our clients are U.S., then a smaller chunk are Canadian and UK typically. So it's like a 40-30-30 type of situation. And then we only relocate to Kenya. Now, that's for onboarding. So all of our clients engage with us in Kenya. Now, have we done sending some Kenyans to America? Yes, right? But everybody has to onboard in Kenya because our lawyers are Kenyan lawyers. They have Kenyan licenses under the LSK, and they're advocates of the High Court of Kenya. So our lawyers don't initiate engagement outside of Kenya. However, once engaged, there's something called the Know Your Client standard. All right. So once we have the KYC standard, then we can assist those clients in other territories as well. So we have been known to do L1As, which an L1A is essentially you have a business both in whatever country you're applying from. It doesn't have to be Kenya. It's not a Kenya specific, thing. But you have a business in the country you're coming from, and you have a business in the United States of America. If you have a business on both sides, and it has to be legitimate, you got to show your tax returns and all of that, and you have an employee in the United States, then you can transfer yourself and your entire family to the United States to manage that employee. It's called an L1A, intercompany transfer, right? It's probably next to being married. It's probably the easiest way, as long as you're a legitimate business person, to get to the United States. So we have been known to assist with that for clients who onboard in Kenya. Do you also assist with finding work and living arrangements? No, because we have specials. Well, living, yes. Work, no. We have, services that make it so that you don't have to work when you move here. So living, yes, we are vertically integrated. We own our law firm, and then above that law firm, we actually own an architectural firm. Above that architectural firm, we own a general contractor. So we build houses for our clients. They come here with brand new houses, typically that they design. Sometimes we have specials. Like right now, there's a special where you don't get to design the house because it's all priced in, but you also get a situation where you don't have to work anymore. So, you know, give and get, right? Pros and cons. So the con is you don't get to design the house. It's a 1,600 square foot house that we've already designed. But the pro is that you get our bond waterfalling service. So the bonds that you get end up paying you a minimum of 50,000 Kenyan shillings per month for the next like 10 years, some of them even 20 years. So now you have this passive income coming in that covers your basic expenses. If your expenses are more than that, then we have to adjust the bonds or whatever and adjust the price accordingly. But that's typically how we handle that. Work permits can only be issued if you're hired by a local company, and the amount that they would pay a local is way lower than anything that you're used to. It's probably lower than minimum wage wherever you're coming from. So to set up like work permits and expect you to like work a standard job and get local pay and like live off of that is really setting you up for failure. So we don't do the work thing. We make sure that there's a path where you don't have to work and all of your bills are taken care of. That's typically how we do that. That won't last forever though. There's really incredible ROI on bonds right now, but of course bond ROI is going to go back to normal. The good thing about a bond is though, whatever you buy it at, that ROI is locked in for the life of the bond. So even if bonds go down in the next 2 years, if you got locked in at 14%, you still get your 14%, sorry, for 20 years, right? So which is like 1.5 the S&P 500, right? S&P 500, you're historically going to get like 10%, maybe 10.5% annualized. But if you're locked into a 14% bond, then you're going to get that for as long as the bond is going, right? If you're a Kenyan with no businesses overseas, company can't help. Yeah, no. Because with that, you need a specialized company that's like, if you're a Kenyan trying to go somewhere else, you need one of those companies that specializes in like getting you visas and sending you to other companies or other countries, sorry. For us, we do a lot of business stuff. So we do have business ways of making that happen, but not for people who are just like, hey, I want to go to Europe. You know, there are people who do that though. There are people that is their business. So definitely link up with them. What if I just want to buy the bond? Yeah, we offer the bond service as well. We offer just the bond, like the same bond waterfall service. Then we can either implement that in an offshore generational wealth trust, which makes that trust grow very quickly. So a lot of people, they'll do their offshore generational wealth trust, and instead of doing a full package like we have running now, where you get your immigration, you get your land, you get us to build the house on your land, you get the trust fund, and then you get the bonds so that you don't have to work and you can live here. There are a lot of people like, hey, just set me up the trust fund and then use the bonds to fund the trust fund, and then 20 years from now, my kids are millionaires, right? Absolutely. We can absolutely do that. If people just want to buy like one bond, it doesn't make sense to go through us. You know what I mean? So at that point, you just call a broker and buy, the bond if you want. But if it's a greater plan, then it makes sense for us to protect you with like the trust funds and all of that stuff and get legal involved, and then implement that bond strategy into your plan. But if you just want to buy like a bond as like a stock, then you just like go to a broker for that one. Oh yeah, tapping on the screen increases visibility, guys. So yeah, go ahead and tap on the screen, share the live, do those things, those TikTok things. The rest of you guys don't tap on your screen. YouTube, Facebook, don't. Talking specifically to TikTok. Where can I start then? All of these lives are on corporate accounts. And so the difference between a corporate account and a personal account is typically they allow us to put like links in the bio. So you should be able to find a company link that will set you up with a consultation. And then we'll figure out what works for you. And then we'll go from there. Typically everybody's a little bit different. What do the bonds pay out? Our target is that the bond is 10-year and has at least 10% ROI. That typically is never the case. It's typically more than that. Let me show you the bonds for right now that are available. All right, so this is the, I'll put on the green screen for you as well, YouTube. I can't do it for TikTok, so you're just gonna have to, or not TikTok, I can't do it for Facebook, so you're just gonna have to kind of listen along on the Facebook side. All right, there you go, YouTube. So these are the current bonds that are available. The long one, as you can see there, it says that there's 21.8 years to maturity, and it's 14.188%. So you're guaranteed 14.188% of the government of Kenya for the next 21.8 years. It pays out twice a month. So having this bond would give you two payments, during the year. I believe it pays out in March and September. All right, the other bond there, it's a shorter bond. You see it has 13.2 years until maturity on it. It is out 12.8730%. There's 10% withholding tax on both of them. That comes out of the payment. And that one, let's see. That one, yeah, has 13.2, and it pays out in April and October, right? So you can see that by buying both of these bonds, you get at least 10 years of above 10%. Both of them are above 10% ROI, and bonds pay out every 6 months. So that's 1 quarter's worth of you getting, payments for the government to support yourself. So the way you do the rest of the bond laddering is you would have to get the other, 3 quarters, of course. And then you have a payment coming from the government guaranteed for, we always use a minimum of 10-year target. Both of these are above 10 years. And we use a 10% target. Both of these are above 10%, right? So that's the way it typically plays out. And then those things pay you for essentially the first 10 years that you're here and you don't need a job. I will show you our report from last year. So this is, give me 1 minute to also show it to YouTube. All right, so this is the actual report from last year. So you can see that halfway through the year, all the numbers repeat, right? And so the bond that they got in January, that was a 12% ROI. So the gross payout was $60,000. The tax deduction was $6,000. They got $54,000. The payout in February was an infrastructure bond. Infrastructure bonds are amazing because they're tax exempt. So the gross payout was $92,303.50. The tax they paid on that was $0, so they got $92,350 in their bank account. March, it was $80,000, 10% withholding tax, so they got $72,000 in their bank account. April, it was $69,710, 10% withholding tax, so that was $6,971 withheld. They got $62,739 in their bank account. May, $67,000, 10% withholding. Took $6,700 out of there. They got $60,000 in their bank account. And then June was another infrastructure bond, so no taxes. They got $66,075 gross. They got $66,075 in their bank account. And then it starts over because that was 6 months, and it's every 6 months you get paid. So you see the numbers are exactly the same. So for last year, the target was at least 10%, right? At least 10 years. And you can see here what actually went out to the clients that were part of this batch last year. Everything was above 10%, and everything but the infrastructure bonds was above 10 years, right? Infrastructure bonds will always make an exception for it because they're tax exempt. And you can see that the highest payment on here is an infrastructure bond payment because of that tax exempt status. So that's essentially how that works. It's super simple if you have a professional. Um, and then you move here and you don't have to work at all. Like now you can just focus on whatever your dreams are, which is typically what people do. Like they'll get out here and they'll finally do the thing that they've been saying they were going to do. So we got a bunch of people in that group who are writing the book that they said they were always going to write. We got a guy who always wanted to be a voice actor and now he's doing voice acting because he doesn't have to worry about money coming in. So that's typically what folks will do is once they on board with that process and they don't have to work anymore, they lean into one of their passions. The vast majority, about 80% of folks, do continue working. And a lot of them were in a position where they were like, oh no, my job isn't remote. My employer would never let me work remote, da, 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 da. And then they do this. And now it doesn't matter what their employer would do because they don't need money to survive. They have guaranteed income for the next 10 years. And they approach their employer from that position, and all of a sudden, the hard-ass employer that would never let them work remote lets them work remote because now they can do what they want. So rather than lose them, they're just like, oh, okay, we'll set up a remote position for you, blah, 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 blah. And it knocks their socks off. They're like, I can't believe they said yes to that because they were under the fear of being terminated. And then when they presented themselves as, hey, I just, bought a package with enough, passive income to live off the next 10 years and not worry about working. I would like to continue working, but if you say no, then I'm just going to leave. So what do you want to do? All of a sudden, there's remote work opportunities for you. So it's interesting how people's lives change when having to pay bills is no longer hanging over their head. Yes, yeah. You can definitely do it that way. You'll have the bonds, and the bonds will go into whatever bank account you want, right? And part of the special is a trust, so you have a trust no matter what, right? Typically, the trust would then pay out to you because the specific type of trust that we use, the distributions are tax exempt up to 10 million, right? And you're not getting distributions of 10 million out of that trust typically. Obviously, you could buy enough bonds to make it 10 million, but 10 million a year is tax exempt on this side. So they'll go into the trust, and then when the distributions come out, there'll be no taxable event based on those distributions coming out. So it's okay to put it through like that additional layer, right? So you could have that trust going ahead and doing the bond laddering and the money just sitting in there with no distributions until you arrive and then start making distributions to yourself. That would be fine. It's actually already set up that way. Can you main tour? Can you main tour? Can you main tour a trust grand tour? I'm not sure what you're saying. Try that again, Ashley. Can you maintain non-grantor trust that way? Well, yes. The trust itself would be non-grantor, but you would have to make a tax filing every time you get a distribution, right? Well, not every time, but at the end of the year when you make your tax filings, you'd have to, claim those distributions, right? So it all depends. The trust could own a company, right? So we do have, trusts where the trust owns a company and you're actually being paid by that company, which means that we have to apply for a work permit for you and all of that. And then you can use FTC to deduct the taxes that you paid at the company from the U.S. taxes, and you would have foreign earned income exclusion. Now you're losing some of the money to taxes because now you're being paid. But you could use the foreign earned income exclusion to make sure that the first $130,000 is non-taxable on the U.S. side. So there are things you can do. You just got to run all of that by your local tax people. That's all. So set up everything. Question mark. So set up everything. Are you asking if we set up everything, or are you asking that should you set up everything before you arrive? Give me a little more clarity on that. Yes. Yes, you should, or yes, we should. Do we? Yes. If you buy a package from us, we do everything within that package. So there'll be a contract, there'll be like a service level agreement. It'll have all the deliverables and all of that. But like our end of year package that we're doing right now, it's your immigration. So processes your immigration to come here. All of your legalities as far as compliance is concerned. So it process all your tax legalities and all of that. It buys you a piece of land here by the Danny Beach. No, you can't choose a different piece of land because it's all part of the pricing. You can, but now you're not in the special anymore. Now it's a la carte, and we'll have to set up different pricing for you. It includes a 1,600 square foot house, 2 to 3 bedroom, 1,600 square foot house on that same property. It includes a trust fund to manage, everything to manage your estate and all of that. And it includes the government bonds that would be paying you monthly so that you have something to live off while you're here. So that's all set up, and then in the contract are all those deliverables broken down of how all of that works. There's some other things that are consequential to all of that are not mentioned. There's an upgrade that includes a car. So if you get the upgrade that includes a car, then we convert your driver's license from whatever country you're coming from to this country, and you're able to drive that car and all of that stuff. So all of those things are all included, and there's a full breakdown, in the contract as to what all the deliverables are. You do have some things that you have to provide, like we can't process you without a copy of your passport, right? So like you have to provide your passport on time. If you're lollygagging on providing the passport, then it's not our fault if it takes longer for you to get, that service. And if the bonds run out before that happens, because you ain't send us your passport in time, you know what I mean? So you have some responsibilities too. You got to send us your passport style photo, so which is just a selfie against a white background. You got to send it to us on time. You got to send us your passport, a picture of your passport on time. Typically need 3 months of your bank statements. You got to send that to us on time. That's part of the application. And those are really the only things that you have to do. Now, there's something called an office action that comes from the government. We can't control that. So if the government has a question about something, then we ask you the question and you need to respond on time, right? So as long as, you're doing your part, which is pretty much just responding to emails on time, then everything flows very smoothly. And then by the end of like 9 months, your house is built, you're here, your bonds should probably be bought by then as well. If not, we're just waiting for 1 or 2 more by that point in time. Your bank accounts are all set up. Your car is probably purchased at that point as well, and you're just ready to rock. So it takes typically 9 months to build the house, and then we're doing everything else that you need inside those 9 months, right? And so typically everything's done by the same time that your house is done. So that's a very high level overview, very brief synopsis of how it works. If you need something special or you need something bespoke, then the packages are not where you want to be. Then we just price everything out individually. So, like for example, we just had it was like a family of 12 that came through, and so there were like 7 buildings on their estate. So they sat down with their architect. They wanted like a private barber, like a barber shop and salon and spa and all of that. So there's a building that's dedicated to like the barber shop, the salon, the spa, and all of that. They got a big tennis court. They got a basketball court. They have an archery range. I always forget that part. One of the guys is like an Olympic level archer. They have, what else did they get? They have 5 houses. So there's a house for like, there's grandmas coming and grandpa. And then there's, 2 brothers and 2 sisters. that are on there. So we built out a whole giant thing for them that was, very bespoke. It was outside of the range of any like setup package, right? So you can do anything you want, but when we price out these packages and we say, all right, 185,000 for this, and you get a house and you get a trust and you get, passive income for 10 years where you don't have to work for 10 years and da 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 da. All of those things are already pre-priced and set up, right? And that's why we can't really change the house because we already have a deal with like the suppliers that supply the windows for the house, the tile work for the house, the faucets for the house, the toilets for the house. Like all of that's already set in stone. So that's why we're able to offer such great packages because those things have already been negotiated. But you can definitely do bespoke stuff outside of the package if that's what your family needs. We also had like a family of 10 just come through. And so they may put something similar up on like an acre that's available to them. But even like the price of the land is already set up. That's why people who are taking this package are coming to live at the beach. And, because those plots of land, we've already pre-negotiated the prices on and it fits inside of the package. And there's only 10 plots left. That was yesterday. I'm sorry, there's only 8 plots left. We sold 2 of them yesterday. So there's only 8 plots left. So like once that's done, we will probably make an attempt to find more land at that price. But if we can't, then we won't be able to do the package. So the package will just close because there's no more land plots available. Or we'll come out with another package and say, okay, now this is the new price because we had to renegotiate more land or whatever. So yeah, the packages are pretty limited. And bond interest goes up and down, right? So right now it's really high because there's a lot of development projects, but it won't be forever, right? You can't get a bond at 14% in the United States, right? So eventually the bond is going to go down to 6-7%, at which point it's not going to be worth it anymore to do this particular strategy. So the folks that don't want to have to work when they relocate here, now is essentially the time to do it. Because if you don't do it now, you're going to have to get a job. And that's going to suck, right? Most of the people who come over here on that level, it's a business. Like, it's not get a job. There are some, like, essentially high-level jobs that will take care of you, but you do not want to be working a local job out here and making 20,000 shillings a month, right? So if you can do the bond laddering, then you're guaranteed 50,000 shillings a month, right? Which is above, the median. Can you increase yes, yeah. If you want to make more than 50, you can increase that. That's a really easy adjustment. So we would just figure out how much more it would cost in the bond market to get to whatever your target number is, and just increase the price by that. Just bond laddering with the trust is 85,000. The package with the house, 185,000. That's absolutely correct. Where do you live? The DC area? Okay. How many square feet is that? So you have a smaller house and it was $350,000. Yeah, that's exactly, you know, is exactly correct. That's why people do it, right? They don't do it because it's more expensive. You have a 1,400 square foot house in Virginia, that's 350,000. And for 185,000, you'll not only get a 1,600 square foot house here, brand new, but you won't have to work for the next 10 years. That's why we do it. Have a 1,500 square foot house in DF. What's that? Oh, Dallas Fort Worth in Texas. Aha, in Texas. Okay. 420,000. Yep. We hear these things all the time, but that's why that's why we do it. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It is a steal. That is very, very true. How far is the actual beach? The beaches, if you're walking, it would take you, oh man, we timed this just the other day. If you're walking, I think it's 22 minutes to get to the beach. If you're driving, it's literally 5. And most people upgrade to the car. So most people get the car and then, yeah. I'm trying, you know what? Do I have, oh, but you're asking on Facebook, so I can't even put up a picture. I think I do have a picture that shows like where the beach property is right now, and then it has like a, on Google you can draw a line and it'll tell you how many miles or kilometers it is and how many minutes. So there's like a line to the beach from there, and it shows. But yeah, it's really, really, really close. In fact, there's one plot of land that's like up on a hill, and if you build the house, the 1,600 square feet houses are 2 stories, but if you build like a 3-story house there, even on a 2-story house, on the functional roof, you can see the water from that house because it's high enough. The other houses, there are like things in the way or whatever, like trees, palm trees, and all that in the way. But the house that's on the top of the hill, you can actually see the ocean from that rooftop. So yeah, it's pretty close. Within 5 minutes of the beach, it would be 20 million minimum where I live. Where do you live? Oh, Miami, absolutely. You are absolutely correct. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, so like for you, you're right. You'd be getting a $20 million equivalent house for where you live for really for 100,000, because the rest of it is the bond laddering and all that. Because if you buy the bond laddering by itself, it's 85. So really the house is just the additional 100,000. And we can only manage that because of our deals. If you go back and you look at our account, you'll see that we just spent a month in China signing new deals and negotiating new terms with suppliers and all of that. So that's really why we can come back now and offer things like this. Yeah. Well, so that's the difference between like serious prospects and non-serious prospects, right? Like serious prospects know what the real prices are and like know what it would cost them to do this in the US and know what the limitations are. So that's why we don't have like a sales team, right? Because for real prospects, it's a no-brainer. People call us and they're just like, "Hey, where do I wire?" And we're like, "Wait, you got to sign the sales agreement, the service agreement." And they're like, "That's cool, but give me the bank information. Like, I'll sign the agreement. Where do I wire the money?" So yeah. The 85 is legal and immigration included. Yes. So in the 85, it's legal, immigration, trust fund, waterfall of the bonds. And then with the 185, the same thing. And then if you want the luxury SUV, it's like, I want to say it's is it 230 or 215? Oh, of course. Okay. So there are multiple different cars. So it could be either. The highest is 230. But yeah, we wouldn't set you up with a special that you can't access. So the special is always going to include like the immigration and legal, because if we just have, a trust fund over here that you can't get to, that wouldn't make any sense. That would mess us up. Right now, I mean, you go check us out wherever, Better Business Bureau, like wherever, we're good. You know what I mean? But we don't set up people. We actually tell a lot of people no because they want to set themselves up for failure. And we're like, listen, there are plenty of people who just take your money and do what you're asking for, but what you're asking for doesn't work the way you think it works. So, because for us, we're typically with these people for the next 7 years because it takes 7 years to get dual citizenship. So most people, they're going to look to get dual citizenship. So we're with those people for 7 years. We're not trying to create a 7-year bad relationship. Well, I mean, yeah, it's good business as well. So that's obviously true. But even beyond that, sometimes we do like investment stuff, right? So who's our investor pool? All the people that we've done good business with. So when we step to them and say, "Hey, listen, we're about to do this thing. We think it's going to give us 20, 30% returns. Here's the prospectus. Do you want to be on board?" What do 90% of the people say after we've done 7 years of great business with them? Yeah, make me some money, let's go. you know so it's self-serving in that regard as well. You know what I mean? I don't want to make it sound too altruistic. Yeah, yeah, no, for sure, for sure. What clients are we most hands-on with? Generational wealth clients. Yeah, we're most hands-on with them because their plan needs the most like tinkering, because things change that affect them almost yearly, but definitely every administration, and not like just the Kenyan administration, because sometimes that's not even the focus of their generational wealth plan. But tax things change, how trusts are treated change, how you get, like, look at America right now, how you get citizenship changes. So typically in a generational wealth setup, there's passport portfolios where you're setting the foundation for your descendants to be able to have multiple nationalities and be able to engage in in multiple financial markets. There's education that goes into it, so you have to make sure that the next generation learns stewardship, which is really the number one differentiator between rich people and wealthy people is stewardship. But that's a whole lot for another day. And so all of those things, the compounding of assets, right? Because that's how the trust makes its money, is compounding what's in the trust to make sure that when your kids are ready, hopefully there's millions of dollars in that trust for those kids and so on and so forth. So those are the things that go into generational wealth, way more intensive than say just immigration, right? So those clients are typically the ones that we do the most work with. Actually, surprisingly, no. because it's a generational wealth trust, we don't make a whole lot of money off of them for like the first 10 years because we're getting a percentage of what we make them, not the whole trust. Like asset protection trust, you get a percentage of the trust, right? So you get a percentage of the assets on their management, essentially, right? Is what they call it. But with the generational wealth trust, you could be starting with very little money and you're trying to compound that over 60 years until it's significant money 60 years later. So there are like generational wealth trusts where like literally the trustee makes like $60 a year, right? Because if they're getting, 6% of what they make, and let's say they make 10%, which is S&P 500 stuff, right? That's great. But if they make 10% on $1,000, right? What's that? $100. And if they get 6% of what they make the trust, they're getting 6% of $100 for the entire year, right? What are they looking at, right? $6 for the entire year, right? So until the compounding steps up in that account, they're not actually making it. Now, 60 years down the road, where the compounding has gotten to the point where there's $600,000 in there, right? And a doubling happens, so now it's at 1.2 million, and so you made them 600,000 in that compounding, and now you're getting 6% of the 600,000. Now we're talking a payday, but that took 30, 60 years to get to. So it actually isn't. They actually don't necessarily pay the best. It's just something that we want to make sure people have generational wealth, and so we're committed in the same way that they're committed. And so we have to wait just as long as they got to wait. So yeah, most of the generational wealth people, like by the time the trust company is making a ton of money, I won't even be alive, more than likely. It's their package for the laddering generational wealth trust, and so it's the 85, right? What he was just talking about before. And just a regular beater Toyota truck. Yeah, the 85 would give you the generational wealth trust. You already have land. Do you already have immigration? If you already have immigration, it'd be 75. Because if you already have land and a house, I'm assuming you have a permit. Hopefully you're not border running and living here illegally. But if you want a beater, typically we just let you get that on your own. We do have people who are like, oh, I just want a beater. The reason we do that is because when we buy a car, there's like a 7-year warranty on it. Like it's new, it's like whatever. For us to buy a beater, what if it breaks down in a month? And we're the ones who bought you that car, right? So we don't even deal with that like level of liability. We buy people new cars with 7-year warranties on them or 200,000 kilometers, whichever comes first. Like that's the way we do it. So if something does go wrong, cool, you got a warranty, get it fixed for free, you know what I mean? Like, let's go. But if we just buy a beater Toyota and it breaks down in a week, you know what I mean? We're not really for all that. So if that's what somebody wants to do, we just let them do that on their own. Yeah, no problem, no problem. So if you need immigration, it's 85. If you just need the trust and the waterfalling services and all that, we can absolutely do that and if you have a land and a house already, we can either put the land in the trust if you want it to go to another generation, or we don't have to. We can just have you be the beneficiary of the trust and let the trust pay you out. And then that way, when you do pass, the land and the house will go into probate if you haven't put that in the trust, but like your money won't. So the money will go to whoever you want it to go to, whatever descendant or next of kin or whatever you want it to go to. But they'll be going to court for the land if it's not in the trust. Yeah, no problem, man. You're welcome. Anytime. You reached out by email on the website. You mean an email form? Like you filled out like one of those like get back to us forms on the website? Or did you send an email? Because if you sent an email, you should got a response in like 24 hours. If you did a form, the form, there was our website was down for a day. And we didn't even know it until somebody told us, "Hey, I just filled out your form." So you might have just walked into that. Just send an email to myfreedom@diasporaltd.com, or go back and do the email form again, either or. But there was a day when the forms weren't working. So yeah, I apologize for that. But you'll always get a reply. If it's the weekend doesn't count. But within 24 business hours, you'll always get a reply. So if that didn't happen, one or two things happened. We actually had somebody else that was like on the live, and they were like, "Oh, I didn't get the reply." And then I was able to like look. I have my computer and all that. When I do this stuff inside, I was able to look them up, and they did their email wrong, right? So it's either like a digit of the email came in wrong, or it's going to be that time when the website went down. It was like a WordPress issue, and we had to update everything, and it sucked. But yeah. So yeah, today is Sunday. If you send something to My Freedom at Diaspora Ltd, you will absolutely have a reply by Tuesday. You should be able to see the email in the bio of this account. So I think every single one of these business accounts, you can definitely get the email. Some of them have like booking links to consultations, but I think they all have the email. Okay. Hello. Yeah, I always forget to tap the screen thing. I think I'm gonna have to get some mods that start telling people tap the screen, sure. And then the rest of you guys look at me crazy because the other two streams don't have that. So YouTube, don't tap your screen. Facebook, don't tap your screen. Anything you hear like that is a TikTok thing. There should be an option where like I can press a button and I don't know, every 30 minutes TikTok just puts the tap the screen thing as a comment. Like okay. Yes, once the trust is set up, you can add whatever you want to it whenever you want. If you already have the land in the house, then the only issue is going to be if something happens to you before you do that conversion, then it's not protected. But yeah, you could always. Diaspora Freedom Initiative phone number. That should be, yeah, you're here on TikTok. That should be up there as well. We're a U.S. company, and we started in New Jersey. We moved our company to Pennsylvania. But it's still a New Jersey number. So it's, what is it, 856-481-2463. but our hours of operation are obviously Eastern Africa. So typically, you just leave a message with the messaging service. You can contact us on WhatsApp with that number as well. Um, and the messaging service typically gets back to you first, especially if you're contacting us during U.S. hours, and then we'll respond at some point. But the best way to do it is set up a consultation. You don't have to set up a paid consultation. You can set up a discovery call. We do not solve people's problems in discovery calls, but we are able to figure out whether or not we're even a good fit for you in the discovery call and whether we can do what you want done. So by the end of the discovery call, we can give you like a guarantee or refer you to someone else who's a better fit for you, if that's, what the circumstance requires. So what if a new infrastructure bond comes out after everybody buys infrastructure bonds? And at that point, so see, the methodology is to make sure that you're covered, right? So you're covered on whatever your basic, needs are, right? So if a new infrastructure bond comes out, there's no limit on how much of that you can buy, and everybody buys some. But you might not have to buy at that same level. Like you don't have to buy the million, you don't have to buy whatever because you're already covered. So now you're just adding more money to your pile, right? So at that point, like when we do the waterfall, it's a minimum of 1 million local currency that we're putting into all of them to make sure it covers you, right? But if a new infrastructure bond comes out, and you already have your waterfall going, you can decide like, oh, I'm just going to get 100,000 of that. You know what I mean? Because it's a new infrastructure. You see what I'm saying? So you'll always be able to just get into, anything that's new that comes out because you're cool, you're covered, So you have what we call ad hoc opportunity ability. So you'll be able to have ad hoc funds set to the side for any opportunity that comes up that you just want to jump into. You'll be able to do that, and that really is a difference between folks who are very, very successful in their investment and folks who are not. It's the fact that they have the money to take advantage of. Like there are people who really probably do want to take advantage of this, and they're just not going to be able to get the money together before we close this in February, right? And they're just gonna miss. You know what I mean? And then that's going to be one of those stories. You know what I mean? The stories of the people who were like, I could have invested in Viagra. And the stories of the people who were like, I could have invested in Google when it first dropped. And I could have invested in Apple when it first dropped. It's just going to be one of those folks, that like, if they couldn't get the money together. And that's like the sad story of so many folks. I'm even one of them. I actually was in a position to invest in Viagra, right? And so, but I couldn't get the money together in time back then, right? So that is definitely a defining point in people who are really, really successful investments and people who are not. They have ad hoc funds that they have set aside that they can just take advantage of opportunities when they show up, right? So that's what you'll be. Like once you got the waterfall going, you should be in a position discipline-wise where there's some ad hoc funds to the side for you to take advantage of opportunities. Exactly. That's where you want to be. You want to be in a situation where like your U.S. income is a huge bonus, right? And you just got stuff working for you, and you'll want stuff working for you at the U.S. That's part of that whole like passport portfolio thing, right? You're instantaneously starting your passport portfolio situation once you're here, moving towards your citizenship, right? So if you can, if you have a 529 account that you can set up for your grandkids or whatever, and now you're just throwing money into that on the U.S. side, right? Maybe you max out your Social Security because you can do that. You can completely pay off your Social Security and never have to touch it again, right? So there are folks that do that. So there's all kinds of stuff that you can do with the U.S. income. Like I said, about 80% of people do not quit their job. They can, but they don't, right? Which is a great idea. Keep the money coming, right? But just start putting it to work because you'll never outwork money. Just start putting it to work, and about 2 to 3 years after people, come through and they have a setup going, they normally get really, really good at investing because they're in a situation where they're really, really learning a lot about it. Oh yeah, and if you're retired, then obviously you don't even have a choice on that. That money just keeps coming in. But yeah, but you're able to just put it to work for whatever you want. Like if you're already retired, retired, you're not necessarily putting a whole bunch of it to work for you, but you might have grandkids. You're like, you know what? I can now afford to put 200 to the side for them every month and be dedicated to that. You know what I mean? And make sure that, there's, $2,400 a month going into some kind of account for the kid that's going to compound, or for the grandkids that's going to compound, or whatever. So there's a lot of that. We see a lot of that, which is beautiful. We really love generational wealth. We like to see people do it. We want to make sure that our community betters itself, over the years. And a lot of it comes from retirees. A lot of it comes from grandpa and grandma, where mom and dad are just too busy in the rat race to even think about it. So a lot of our people that set up that generational wealth, situation with the generational wealth trust, or however they decide to get involved in it, a lot of them are retired, and a lot of them is for grandkids. Yeah, you can also, yeah, that's very true. You can also add beneficiaries, and we've seen that happen as well. Like, especially people who waterfall the trust, like the folks who waterfall the trust in 2023. A lot of them have come back and be like, let me add my kids to that. I thought it was going to take longer. But because they have that waterfall going, and how great the bond rates were in 2023 and 2024, now they're like, oh, my kid could actually benefit from this. I don't have to wait 30 years for the grandkid. So there's quite a bit of that happening as well. Okay. All right, YouTube starting to go up again. All right. It has been 2 hours, 57 minutes, and 20 seconds that I've been live. So, any other questions on any of that? Any other questions on any of that? Thanks for liking the live. Milan, thank you. Any other questions on any of what we have been talking about today? All right, then it looks like I can call it. My son's still asleep, so we'll see what happens with that. Typically, he's already awake and wanting to go to the pool. All right, guys. Looks like you guys don't have any more questions for me today. I will see you tomorrow around the exact same time. Enjoy yourself. If a question does come up, just go ahead and email it to me. Same time tomorrow. You got it. And email me your questions, and I'll actually answer them on the next live. If you email me a question today, I will be able to respond to it tomorrow. So if you have any additional questions, just go ahead and email them to me. If it's like really, really specific, then I'll like change the names and I'll change things around and do like a case study of it in one of these lives. It might not be tomorrow because I might have to research if it's super specific. But I'll come back out on a live and like not expose you or your personal situation, but I'll go through the scenario. So if something comes to your head after this is done, just go ahead and email me. All right, guys, thanks for your time. Same time tomorrow. I will see you then.